The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed.
Did the world wars, revolutions, and big events of human history evolve naturally, or were they calculated and pre-planned? If they were pre-planned, who planned them, and what are they planning for the future of humanity? The answer to this puzzling question can be found within the boundaries of 3 of the world's most powerful cities. Those 3 cities belong to no nation and pay no taxes. They are Washington's District of Columbia, which is not part of the city of Washington or of the United States, the inner city of London, which is not part of London or England, and Vatican City, which is not part of Rome or Italy.
General Albert Pike was born in December of 1809. He was exceptionally bright and allegedly accepted into Harvard, although he didn't have the money to attend. Today, Pike is remembered as a pioneer in the early courts of Arkansas, a Confederate officer during the Civil War, and a central figure in the development of Freemasonry. He's still the only Confederate officer with a statue in Washington, D.C. History is divided on Pike. He's been called a genius, a villain, and an occultist. But that's not all there is to this story. Some people believe Albert Pike was more than just a lawyer and a general. Much, much more. Here's where it gets crazy. In 1871, Pike allegedly sent a letter to an Italian political activist named Giuseppe Mazzini, in which he describes a curious dream about 3 world wars. In this letter, Pike apparently outlined specific events leading up to World Wars I and II. Additionally, Pike pushed for the organization of communism, Nazism, Zionism, and other international movements as tools to escalate these conflicts. According to this letter, the Illuminati will provoke a 3rd World War by creating religious conflicts in the Middle East.
Vatican City is in fact a state, the smallest principality in the world. It lies on the banks of the Tiber, completely surrounded by the city of Rome. Its status as a separate state emerged from the Lateran Agreements of February 1929. It has its own newspaper, postal service, radio and television station, its own flag, and a population of about 1,000.
The Pope, who is the visible ruler of this colossal global wealth, is one of the richest men on earth. While 2/3 of the world earns less than $2 a day, and 1/5 of the world is underfed or starving to death, the Vatican hoards the world's wealth, profits from it on the stock market, and at the same time preaches about giving. How did the Pope and Vatican accumulate all that wealth over the millennium?
Do you really want to know the truth? The truth is not what you think you know. It's not what you expect it to be, either. They have left a trail of breadcrumbs for everyone to follow. And they have recently disguised themselves by changing their name to the New World Order. The elite, ruling, Illuminati families are hiding behind false fronts. In truth, they have always been the Old
Money changers, those who loan out and manipulate the quantity of money, were active in medieval England. In fact, they were so active that acting together, they could manipulate the entire English economy. These were not bankers per se. The money changers generally were the goldsmiths. They were the first bankers because they started keeping other people's gold for safekeeping in their vaults. The first paper money was merely a receipt for gold left at the goldsmith. Paper money caught on because it was more convenient than carrying around a lot of heavy gold and silver coins. Eventually, goldsmiths noticed that only a small fraction of the depositors ever came in and demanded their gold at any one time. Goldsmiths started cheating on the system. They discovered that they could print more money than they had gold, and usually no one would be the wiser.
Society today is composed of a series of institutions. From political institutions, legal institutions, religious institutions, to institutions of social class, familial values, and occupational specialization. It is obvious the profound influence these traditionalized structures have in shaping our understandings and perspectives. Yet, of all the social institutions we are born into, directed by, and conditioned upon, there seems to be no system as taken for granted and misunderstood as the monetary system. In a world where 1% of the population owns 40% of the planet's wealth, in a world where 34,000 children die every single day from poverty and preventable diseases, and where 50% of the world's population lives on less than $2 a day, one thing is clear: something is very wrong. And whether we are aware of it or not, the lifeblood of all of our established institutions, and thus society itself, is money. Therefore, understanding this institution of monetary policy is critical to understanding why our lives are the way they are. So what is a central bank? A central bank is an institution that produces the currency of an entire nation. Based on historical precedent, two specific powers are inherent in central banking practice: the control of interest rates and the control of the money supply, or inflation. The central bank does not simply supply a government's economy with money, it loans it to them at interest. Then, through the use of increasing and decreasing the supply of money, the central bank regulates the value of the currency being issued. It is critical to understand that the entire structure of this system can only produce one thing in the long run: debt. It doesn't take a lot of ingenuity to figure this scam out. For every single dollar produced by the central bank is loaned at interest. That means every single dollar produced is actually the dollar plus a certain percent of debt based on that dollar. And since the central bank has the monopoly over the production of the currency for the entire country, and they loan each dollar out with immediate debt attached to it, where does the money to pay for the debt come from? It can only come from the central bank again, which means the central bank has to perpetually increase its money supply to temporarily cover the outstanding debt created, which in turn, since that new money is loaned out at interest as well, creates even more debt. The end result of this system without fail is slavery, for it is impossible for the government and thus the public to ever come out of the self-generating debt.
Mayer Rothschild had 5 sons. He trained them all in the skills of money creation, then sent them out to the major capitals of Europe to open branch offices of the family banking business. His first son, Amschel Mayer, stayed in Frankfurt to mind the hometown bank. His second son, Solomon, was sent to Vienna. His third son, Nathan, was clearly the most clever. He was sent to London at age 21 in 1798, 100 years after the founding of the Bank of England. His fourth son, Karl, went to Naples, and his fifth son, Jacob, went to Paris. Rothschild soon grew unbelievably wealthy. By the mid-1800s, they dominated all European banking and were certainly the wealthiest family in the world. They financed Cecil Rhodes, making it possible for him to establish a monopoly over the diamond and gold fields of South Africa. In America, they financed the Harrimans and railroads, the Vanderbilts and railroads and the press, and Carnegie in the steel industry, among many others. In fact, during World War I, J.P. Morgan was thought to be the richest man in America. But after his death, it was discovered that he was actually only a lieutenant of the Rothschilds. By 1850, James Rothschild, the heir of the French branch of the family, was said to be worth 600 million French francs, 150 million more than all the other bankers in France put together.
By the end of the 1600s, England was in financial ruin. 50 years of more or less continuous wars with France and Holland had exhausted her.
Frantic government officials met with the money changers to beg for the loans necessary to pursue their political purposes. The price was high. A government-sanctioned, privately owned bank which could issue money created out of nothing. It was to be the modern world's first privately owned central bank, the Bank of England. Unfortunately, nearly every nation now has a privately controlled central bank using the Bank of England as the basic model. Such is the power of these central banks that they soon take total control over a nation's economy. It soon amounts to nothing but a plutocracy ruled by the rich. The central bank scam is really a hidden tax. The nation sells bonds to the central bank to pay for things it does not have the political will to raise taxes to pay for. But the bonds are purchased with money the central bank creates out of nothing. More money in circulation makes your money worth less. The government gets as much money as it needs, and the people pay for it in inflation. The beauty of the plan is that not one person in 1,000 can figure it out because it's usually hidden behind complex-sounding economics gibberish. This is the Waterloo battlefield about 200 miles northeast of Paris in what today is Belgium. Here Napoleon suffered his final defeat, but not before thousands of French and Englishmen gave their lives on a steamy summer day in July of 1815. The outcome was certainly in doubt. In fact, had Napoleon attacked a few hours earlier, he would probably have won the battle. But no matter who won or lost, back in London, Nathan Rothschild planned to use the opportunity to try to seize control over the British stock and bond market and possibly even the Bank of England. If Wellington had been defeated and Napoleon was loose on the continent again, Britain's financial situation would become grave indeed.
Rothschild looked saddened. He stood there motionless, eyes downcast. Then suddenly he began selling.
Other nervous investors saw that Rothschild was selling. It could only mean one thing. Napoleon must have won, Wellington must have lost. The market plummeted. Soon everyone was selling their consols, their British government bonds, and prices dropped sharply. But then Rothschild started secretly buying up the consols through his agents for only a fraction of their worth hours before. What's even more interesting about this story is that some authors claim that the day after the Battle of Waterloo, in a matter of hours, Nathan Rothschild came to dominate not only the bond market, but the Bank of England as well. Whether or not the Rothschild family seized control of the Bank of England, the first privately owned central bank in a major European nation and the wealthiest, one thing is certain. By the mid-1800s, the Rothschilds were the richest family in the world, bar none. They dominated the new government bond markets and branched into other banks and industrial concerns.
It was at that point that John Dee began to conceive of the oil industry as one big interrelated mechanism. And you couldn't just change one component. You had to control the entire machine.
In a move that would transform the American economy, Rockefeller set out to replace a world of independent oil men with a giant company controlled by him. In 1870, begging bankers for more loans, he formed Standard Oil of Ohio. The next year, he quietly put what he called Our Plan, his campaign to dominate the volatile oil industry, into devastating effect.
The image that was always used was that of the anaconda, the squeezing python-like grips of this economic snake that was just taking individual entrepreneurs and just putting them out of business and reducing them to kind of economic strait where they had no alternative but to sell out to the principals in this conspiracy. It was a conspiracy, really. It was one of the first great economic conspiracies in this country.
In an effort to thwart the scheme, many independents refused to sell crude oil to Rockefeller and his associates. Undaunted, Rockefeller used the threat of the South Improvement Company to intimidate his rival refiners in Cleveland. His brother and business partner William characterized the plan as war or peace, sell out to Standard Oil or suffer the consequences. He was changing forever the way America did business. The day of combination is here to stay, he declared. Individualism has gone, never to return.
By 1879, when Rockefeller is 40, he controls 90% of the oil refining in the world. Within a few years, he will control 90% of the marketing of oil and a third of all of the oil wells. So this very young man controls what is not only a national but an international monopoly in a commodity that is about to become the most important strategic commodity in the world economy.
It was 1956. America stood at the pinnacle of its prestige, and the Rockefellers were the nation's first family, not only of wealth, but also of power.
If there was an establishment in America in the 50s, it was these Rockefeller brothers. These young men have taken their place as these absolutely unique members of a unique family. They're, in some sense, the very tip of this kind of the American century, the American experience, this optimism that buoys America in the post-war era. Sometimes they would joke about it. They say, well, David gets Europe, Nelson is going to have Latin America, and, John D. III gets Asia, and then they make some joke about what Winthrop got, which would be something like Arkansas. But nonetheless, there was something really behind the joke.
By the early 20th century, the U.S. had already implemented and removed a few central banking systems, which were swindled into place by ruthless banking interests. At this time, the dominant families in the banking and business world were the Rockefellers, the Morgans, the Warburgs, the Rothschilds. And in the early 1900s, they sought to push, once again, legislation to create another central bank. However, they knew the government and public were very weary of such an institution, so they needed to create an incident to affect public opinion. So, J.P. Morgan, publicly considered a financial luminary at the time, exploited his mass influence by publishing rumors that a prominent bank in New York was insolvent or bankrupt. Morgan knew this would cause mass hysteria, which would affect other banks as well. And it did. The public, in fear of losing their deposits, immediately began mass withdrawals. Consequently, the banks were forced to call in their loans, causing the recipients to sell their property, and thus a spiral of bankruptcies, repossessions, and turmoil emerged. Putting the pieces together a few years later, Frederick Allen of Life magazine wrote, "The Morgan interests took advantage to precipitate the panic, guiding it shrewdly as it progressed." Unaware of the fraud, the Panic of 1907 led to a congressional investigation headed by Senator Nelson Aldrich, who had intimate ties to the banking cartels and later became part of the Rockefeller family through marriage. The commission, led by Aldrich, recommended a central bank should be implemented so a panic like 1907 could never happen again. This was the spark the international bankers needed to initiate their plan. In 1910, a secret meeting was held at a J.P. Morgan estate on Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia. It was there that the central banking bill called the Federal Reserve Act was written. This legislation was written by bankers, not lawmakers. This meeting was so secretive, so concealed from government and public knowledge that the 10 or so figures who attended disguised their names when en route to the island. After this bill was constructed, it was then handed over to their political frontman, Senator Nelson Aldrich, to push through Congress. And in 1913, with heavy political sponsorship by the bankers, Woodrow Wilson became president, having already agreed to sign the Federal Reserve Act in exchange for campaign support. And 2 days before Christmas, when most of Congress was at home with their families, the Federal Reserve Act was voted in, and Wilson in turn made it law.
Under this fractional reserve scheme, we inevitably become debt slaves to a ruling class of financial elite. Not because they are better or smarter than anyone else, but because they have rigged the system to benefit themselves at the expense of most people on the planet. I found it revealing that in the same year the Federal Reserve was founded, 1913, the Internal Revenue Service was also established. An income tax was then instigated so you and I would have to pay the politicians' debt, plus interest, to the bankers.
What is the proper relationship, what should be the proper relationship between a chairman of the Fed and a president of the United States?
Well, first of all, the Federal Reserve is an independent agency, and that means basically that there is no other agency of government which can overrule actions that we take.
Since they took charge, we've been robbed through inflation, and the purchasing power of the dollar has declined more than 96%. And the wealth gap makes it clear most of the money is going to a very few. Only 16 years after the Federal Reserve was in power, America experienced the Great Depression. My research revealed that before the big crash in 1929, the elite bankers pulled their money out of the stock market. After the crash, they used that money to buy up cheap stocks and smaller failing banks for pennies on the dollar. Among the bankers who consolidated their wealth this way were the Rothschilds, Rockefellers, and Morgans. A similar scenario played out in the 2008 financial collapse, with the same bankers benefiting. In the years leading up to the collapse, the biggest banks, including Bank of America, Citigroup, and Chase, controlled by the Rothschilds, Rockefellers, and Morgans, were bundling and trading bad loans that they knew would eventually fail. It's like putting rotten oranges in a box and selling them as grade AAA. The bundlers of the debt knew it was only a matter of time before someone would open that box and see that the content was worthless, since they were the ones who packed the boxes in the first place. When the rotten oranges, what we hear about as unsound loans, derivatives, and credit default swaps, were finally discovered, everyone was impacted. People lost their homes, their jobs, their businesses, and their retirements. Meanwhile, the biggest banks who created the problem in the first place were the ones who got bailed out. Why is that? Why would the Federal Reserve give trillions to the banks, even though the majority of Americans were against bailing them out? And why not help those most in need rather than the perpetrators of the financial collapse? My research led me to believe that the same people who created the Federal Reserve, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, and the Morgans, still control it, and they use this scheme to bail themselves out at our expense.
Many of the banks created are still the most powerful lobby on Capitol Hill, and they, frankly, own the place.
I'm convinced that the near collapse of the economy in 2008 resulted from an orchestrated pump and dump scheme designed and executed by the big bankers to consolidate wealth and power. David Icke explains how he sees the Federal Reserve rigging the so-called business cycles.
Stage one, it's like throwing a fishing line out. Stage one, you put lots of money, units of exchange, into circulation. You do this by pushing interest rates down, by making lots of loans. This is the part of the cycle we call a boom. Because there's lots of units of exchange in circulation, there's lots of money changing hands. That generates lots of economic activity. That generates jobs. And as more and more money is spent, there's more demand. So companies take out more loans of fresh air money to increase their production. people get confident in their everyday lives. Hey, you know, I work for this company, they've got lots of orders, it's really going great, my job's safe, I tell you what, we can have a bigger house. Then they start to change it. What they do is they pull the fishing line in. They push interest rates up. Now, fewer people, are taking out loans, and they make the criteria for having a loan from the bank stronger anyway. And also, now, as interest rates have gone up, a larger part of people's income is going to pay back the extra interest and not being circulated in buying things. Suddenly, there's nothing like as much money in circulation, and therefore, fewer things are being bought. Companies start to go down in terms of their profits, they start to shed jobs, and they start to go out of business. People lose their jobs, they can't pay the mortgage anymore of the big house they took out in the good times. Now what the banks are doing is starting to reel the fishing line in, because as they go bankrupt, companies and individuals, the banks get the real wealth, the property, the land, the resources that they had signed to them for lending merely figures on a screen. Now this economic cycle of fishing line out, fishing line back, lots of units in circulation, pull them in, has been going on for centuries. And what it's done, it's stolen and accumulated the real wealth of the world in the hands of the few.
At the international level, central bankers use the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund to make more money while exploiting the resources of countries they lend to, bankrupting them in the process. The central bank of central banks is the Rothschild-created Bank for International Settlements. The elite are positioning themselves to control access to virtually everything we need to survive.
No matter where you go in the world, the money is controlled by the banking system. They decide if people eat or if they don't eat. Who's a billionaire and who lives on less than $1 a day? He who controls the money controls the world, and a very few control the money.
So I hope the minute that's taken hasn't come off my time, please. My Lords, I'm going to start, I don't wish you to get too encouraged by that. I'm going to start with my conclusions, but I'm not going to sit down when I've made them, because I'm going then to give you the evidence to support them, and hopefully present to you the reasons why I want support for an official inquiry into the mischief I want to unfold to yourselves this afternoon. My Lords, I've been engaged in this pursuit of this issue for nearly 2 years now, and I'm no further through to getting to the truth. I think there are 3 possible conclusions which may come from it. I think there may have been a massive piece of money laundering committed by a major government which ought to know better, and that this has effectively undermined the integrity of a British bank, the Royal Bank of Scotland, in doing so. The second alternative is that a major American department has an agency which has gone rogue on it because it has been wound up and has created a structure out of which they are seeking to get, well, at least 50 billion euros as a payoff. And the third possibility is that this is an extraordinary elaborate fraud which has not been carried out, but which has been prepared in order to provide a threat to one government or more if they don't pay them off. So there are 3 possibilities, and this all needs a very urgent review. My Lords, it starts in April and May of 2009 with the alleged transfer to the United Kingdom, to the HSBC, of a sum of $50 trillion, and 7 days later, ping, in comes another $50 trillion to the HSBC, and then 3 weeks later, another $50 trillion, total of $5 trillion in each case, sorry. Total of $15 trillion is alleged to have been passed into the hands of HSBC for onward transit to the Royal Bank of Scotland, And we need to look to where this came from and what the history of this money is. And I have been trying to sort out the sequence by which this money has been created and where it's come from for a long time. The money was said to have come, first of all, from the Riardi account to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York it was passed to J.P. Morgan Chase in New York for onward transit to London. The means of sending it was a SWIFT note, which ought to have been registered with the Bank of England if it was genuine. So when this happened and came about, I first of all took it to my noble friend Lord Strathclyde and said, what do we do with this? He said, give it to Lord Sassoon, he's the Treasury. So we did, and Lord Sassoon looked at it and said immediately, this is rubbish, it's far too much money, it will stick out like a sore thumb and you can't see it in the Royal Bank of Scotland accounts. Quite right. Secondly, he said, the gold backing it is ridiculous. There's only been 1,507 tons of gold mined in the history of the world, so you can't have 750,000 tons. This is true. And the third thing he said obviously was, it's a scam. And I agree with him, it was a scam. The problem is we stopped looking at that point. We should have asked, what is the scam, instead of at that time just nodding it off. And we have never really resolved this, because today I have this quite frightening piece of paper, which is my justification for bringing it into this meeting today, which is available on the internet, and I'm astonished that it hasn't already been unearthed by the Treasury, and every alarm bell in the land should be ringing if it has, because this is the General Audit Office of the Federal Reserve, the real Federal Reserve in Washington, and its audit review in end of July 2010, on the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. It has on it some 20 banks listed, to which $16.115 trillion are outstanding in loans. My lords, that is the sore thumb that was being looked for by Lord Sassoon. But more particularly, there are two other very interesting things with this. The first is that Barclays Bank have got $868 billion of loan. The Royal Bank of Scotland has got $541 billion, in which case one has to ask, as they could have earned in 3 weeks enough to pay off their entire indebtedness to the taxpayers in Britain, why they have not done so, and could we please ask them to put a cheque in the post tonight for the whole 46 billion? And the third thing that's wrong with it is that every bank on this list, without exception, is an MTN registered bank, which means that they are registered to use medium-term notes to move funds between themselves with an agreed profit share formula, in which case these banks are investing this money, and most extraordinary, not a penny of interest does the Federal Bank of New York want paid on this vast amount of 16 trillion. Anyone amongst yourselves who knows what the IMF rules are will immediately smell a rat, because the IMF has very strict rules for validating dodgy money. There are two ways of doing it. You either pass it through a major central bank like the Bank of England, who had apparently refused to touch this, or alternatively, you put it through to a bank which is an MTN trading bank, which is then able to use the funds on the overnight European MTN trading market, where they can earn between 1 and 2.5% profit per night, and the compound interest on that is huge. So there is a vast profit being made with this money somewhere if it is in fact genuine. So, my lords, I believe that this is such an important issue now that I've put everything I've got on the subject into a 104 megabyte memory thumb, and I want the government to put this to some suitable investigative bureau and take everything I've got on the subject and find out what the truth is of what is going on here, because there is something very seriously wrong. Either we have a huge amount of tax uncollected on profits made, or we have a vast amount of money festering away in the European banking system, which is not real money, in which case we need to take it back. My lords, I ask for an investigation, and please support my plea.
Think of an aspect of your life that dictates the limits of your freedom. Government and law enforcement, insurance and pharmaceutical companies, taxes, building permits, driver's licenses, and more. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of stipulations, regulations, and boundaries on our freedom. And out of the ones that were just mentioned, how many have you researched to find out whether they apply to you or not? Let's look at the forms of law that we currently acquiesce to. A common misconception among people is that any rule or regulation that governs them falls under one category: law. But there are many other forms of law that people abide by without realizing that they simply do not apply to them. Another misconception is that a nation's constitution gives us our rights. A constitution does nothing more than list the rights that we already have. We are born with inalienable rights, endowed to us by our Creator. They are not given to us, and they cannot be given away. The most a person can do with a right is choose whether to exercise it or not. Maritime admiralty law is what's known as the law of the water. It is superseded by civil law and only applies to those who willingly contract themselves into it. The definition of admiralty law is a body of private international law governing the relationships between private entities which operate vessels on the oceans. Let's look at how and why a form of law that is fashioned to govern corporations, businesses, and vessels has imposed its rule over natural human beings. This is all done through a form of word magic. A simple perversion of language has made it possible to convince people around the world that these alternative laws apply to them. One of the predominant beliefs in modern culture is that licenses, permits, registrations, and other forms of documentation are required to operate motor vehicles, use public roads, build structures and establishments, engage in free enterprise, and much more. Sadly, these beliefs are based on little to no investigation whatsoever, and are false. This belief structure is perpetuated by maritime admiralty law. This form of law was originally created to govern ships docking in foreign nations for the import or export of products and resources. It deals with banking and merchant affairs, not civil affairs. When a product is taken off of a ship and brought into a foreign land, that nation takes custody of the resource and accounts for it with a certificate. That certificate marks the birth date of that product in the custody of the respective nation. Think of why it is supposedly required to have a certificate of live birth in the first place. The Barron's Dictionary of Banking Terms defines a certificate as a paper establishing an ownership claim. So right there, we notice that everyone with a birth certificate is defined as being owned. People are used as collateral with other nations because the U.S. is bankrupt. The United States declared bankruptcy on March 9th of 1933. At this point, the U.S. began taking out loans from a private, non-government affiliated corporation called the Federal Reserve. With no money to pay back the loans, the United States began using the citizens as collateral. All birth and marriage certificates are literally warehouse receipts. Just look at the similarities of warehouse receipts and birth certificates. Both document the date of issue, a serial number, registration number or receipt number, a description of the product, and an authorized informant to notify the appropriate government agency. With all of this information being readily available, the majority of people are unaware of their involvement with maritime admiralty law. This is possible through the manipulation of language. This admiralty law changed the meaning of the word person from a natural living person to a corporation. Driver's licenses, vehicle registrations, auto insurance forms, building permits, gun permits, work permits, tax filing documents, birth and death certificates, traffic citations, and many other forms of documentation that were once believed to be absolutely necessary only applied to persons or corporations. Upon signing such a legal document, you are indirectly waiving your rights under the Constitution and lowering your status to that of a corporation that is created with the same exact name as you. The only way to reconcile your true name from the name of the corporation is to take notice that the corporation has its name in all capital letters. This is known as capitis diminutia maxima. You may take notice that your driver's license, birth certificate, social security card, insurance cards, and more Use all capital letters to legally represent the corporation with your name, not you. The corporation is known as an artificial person, whereas you, the human being, are known as a natural person. This deception goes even deeper when it comes to the courts that we attend. When showing up to court, you will notice that there are seats for witnesses behind a wooden fence or barrier. The defendant must cross through the entrance to the other side of the barrier where the plaintiff and judge sit. This act symbolizes the boarding of a ship. At this time, business can be conducted in maritime admiralty law. The judge, acting as captain or banker, is responsible for settling the balance between the two sides. This is why there is always a monetary value involved in any court case. The captain is simply dealing with banking and merchant disputes. Once the balance is paid, the case is closed. To turn the court case away from admiralty law where your rights are not protected, you must avoid agreeing to represent the artificial person. This is done by stating that you are the natural person. You don't have a first or last name because those imply corporate title. In a court case, you may state that the court takes judicial notice of your honor's oath of office. Every judge must take an oath of office to practice law, yet you must make it clear to the court and the jury that the judge is acting as judge and not banker. Remember that you are a natural human being of the earth. You are not governed by anything but your own consciousness. Laws are created within a society. The society that created the laws we see being enforced today is called the Law Society. Yet the most beautiful part of this entire deception is the fact that we are not part of the Law Society, so their laws do not apply to us.
Judges, lawyers, and law enforcement officers, they're all part of a society. Within that society, they've created their own language that's deceptively similar to English. They have these little things called statutes, acts, and regulations that seem like laws, but they really only apply to those within their society. So that basically means all the traffic violations, minimum age requirements, and everything except for damage to another person or their property doesn't really apply to the natural person.
Laws only apply to those within the Law Society. The game being played is an illusion. You can simply choose to open your eyes and reclaim the freedom that you were born with, bound by nothing but the limits of your imagination. These are just a few examples of assuring that your rights are being protected. By far, the most important line of defense against this deception is to be aware of the perversion of language, and be absolutely aware of how you form your beliefs and concepts. In all forms of the perversion of language, there is a mirror reflection of this in the microcosm of the psyche.
And the problem I see with humanity today is we don't truly know ourselves anymore. We have the 9-to-5 job, we have the house, the children, the bills, the television, the hobbies, and the errands that we run every single day, and we eventually begin to believe that this is who we are. You know, but who are we beneath the job title, beneath the status of mother or father, theist or atheist, Republican or Democrat, black or white, man or woman? Who are we? Who are we deep down inside? We don't know, because every time we hear an answer that we don't want to accept about ourselves, we deny it. We'll pass it off and project it onto somebody else and judge them for it. This is repression. And we see what repression can do to us on an individual level, but what about on a collective level of humanity? What happens when the whole world refuses to see what they truly are on the inside?
Any real investigation shows us that the entire financial system by which the world is run today is actually operated by the Crown. And contrary to popular belief, the Crown does not refer to the royal family or to the British monarchy. The Crown actually refers to the inner city of London, which is in fact a privately owned corporation that functions as a completely separate sovereign state outside the jurisdiction of England. Most people are completely unaware that when they swear allegiance to the Crown, they are actually swearing allegiance to this private corporate empire. The inner city of London also has two sister city-states of Vatican City and Washington's District of Columbia, both of which are also separate sovereign states within their host countries. Each of these three city-states has its own flag, its own laws, its own news services and its own police forces, and each pays no taxes to the host country in which it is located. These three cities form a private, covert empire that operates the entire Western world, that is known as the Empire of the Three Cities.
The Vatican rules over approximately 2 billion of the world's 6.1 billion people. The colossal wealth of the Vatican includes enormous investments with the Rothschilds in Britain, France, and the USA, and with giant oil and weapons corporations like Shell and General Electric. The Vatican solid gold bullion worth billions is stored with the Rothschild-controlled Bank of England and the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank. The Catholic Church is the biggest financial power, wealth accumulator, and property owner in existence, possessing more material wealth than any bank, corporation, giant trust, or government anywhere on the globe. Like Vatican City, London's inner city is also a privately owned corporation or city-state, located right smack in the heart of Greater London. It became a sovereign state in 1694 when King William III of Orange privatized and turned the Bank of England over to the bankers. By 1812, Nathan Rothschild crashed the English stock market and scammed control of the Bank of England. Today, the city-state of London is the world's financial power center and the wealthiest square mile on the face of the earth. It houses the Rothschild-controlled Bank of England, Lloyd's of London, the London Stock Exchange, all British banks, the branch offices of 385 foreign banks, and 70 U.S. banks. It has its own courts, its own laws, its own flag, and its own police force. It's not part of Greater London or England or the British Commonwealth and pays no taxes. The city-state of London houses Fleet Street's newspaper and publishing monopolies. It is also the headquarters for worldwide English Freemasonry and headquarters for the worldwide money cartel known as the Crown. Contrary to popular belief, the Crown is not the royal family or the British monarch. The Crown is the private corporate city-state of London. It has a council of 12 members who rule the corporation under a mayor called the Lord Mayor. The Lord Mayor and his 12-member council serve as proxies or representatives who sit in for 13 of the world's wealthiest, most powerful banking families. This ring of 13 ruling families includes the Rothschild family, the Warburg family, the Oppenheimer family, and the Schiff family. These families and their descendants run the Crown Corporation of London. The Crown Corporation holds the title to worldwide Crown land in Crown colonies like Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. The British Parliament and the British Prime Minister serve as a public front for the hidden power of these ruling Crown families. Like the city-state of London and the Vatican, a third city-state was officially created in 1982. That city-state is called the District of Columbia and is located on 10 square miles of land in the heart of Washington. The District of Columbia flies its own flag and has its own independent constitution. Although geographically separate, the city-states of London, the Vatican, and the District of Columbia are one interlocking empire called Empire of the City. The flag of Washington's District of Columbia has 3 red stars, one for each city-state in the 3-city empire. This corporate empire of 3 city-states controls the world economically through London's inner city, militarily through the District of Columbia, and spiritually through the Vatican. The Constitution for the District of Columbia operates under a tyrannical Roman law known as Lex Fori, which bears no resemblance to the U.S. Constitution. When Congress passed the Act of 1871, it created a separate corporate government for the District of Columbia. This treasonous act allowed the District of Columbia to operate as a corporation outside the original Constitution of the United States and outside of the best interests of American citizens. Corporation of the United States. Like Canada and Australia, whose leaders are prime ministers of the Queen and whose land is called Crown Land, the United States is just another crown colony. Crown colonies are controlled by the empire of 3 city-states. At the center of each city-state is a towering, phallic-shaped stone monument called an obelisk that points skyward. In D.C. city-state, the obelisk, known as the Washington Monument, was dedicated to Freemason George Washington by the Freemason Grand Lodge of the District of Columbia. The secretive Brotherhood of Freemasons laid the Washington obelisk's cornerstone in 1848 and contributed 22 Masonic memorial stones. 250 Masonic lodges financed the Washington Monument obelisk, including the Knights Templar Masonic Order. At the heart of London city-state is a 187-ton, 69-foot-tall Egyptian obelisk called Cleopatra's Needle. It was transported from Egypt and erected on the banks of the River Thames. In Vatican City, another Egyptian obelisk towers high above St. Peter's Square. What exactly is an obelisk? Obelisks are phallic-shaped monuments honoring the pagan sun god of ancient Egypt called Amun-Ra. The spirit of this pagan god is said to reside within the obelisk. Obelisks symbolize the phallus and fertility. At the base of the obelisk is a sunwheel circle symbolizing the vagina. Together, they depict male and female sexual union.
At this point, my view of the world had been turned upside down. I was struggling with the realization that the failure and suffering of so many is actually success and fulfillment for a few. The elite central bankers who fooled the world into letting them create money. They already have vast fortunes, so what is their end game? What is their ultimate agenda?
When they lost the Crusades, the Templars went back to Europe, immensely wealthy, immensely powerful, and full of occult knowledge. Now you got to understand something about the Templars. They got very wealthy because they basically provided protection for the pilgrims as they journeyed from Europe to visit the sacred places in the Holy Land. And they got very, very wealthy. Plus there are legends that say that they found Solomon's treasure buried in the ruins of Solomon's temple in Jerusalem, and that they were fabulously wealthy. They got so powerful, and interestingly enough, they became the first international banksters. Everybody tries to blame the Jews for that one, but actually the first international banksters were in fact the Templars. And they got so powerful and so wealthy, they threatened the Vatican, which was not a wise thing to do. So the Pope got together with the King of France, and they conspired to bring down the Templars. In 1307, on October 13th, Friday, they sent out warrants and captured every Knight Templar that they could find, including the Grand Master, whose name was Jacques de Molay. The next thing is, about 100 years later, along came the Rosicrucians. They had the same secret. Some people say that they were just a resurfacing of the Knights Templar under a different name. After that, just 34 years later, we have Ignatius Loyola and the Jesuits. Now, Ignatius Loyola was a Spanish knight, and he got hit in the leg with a cannonball and had to go through a lengthy convalescence. During that time, he had some sort of conversion experience and decided, this sounds familiar, I know, he wanted to start an order of warrior monks, elite warriors that would protect the Pope and would serve the Catholic Church unwaveringly. He came up with a name for this order. He called it Los Illuminados. Now, if any of you speak Spanish, you know that name means the Illuminated Ones. However, the Pope didn't like that name, and so they changed the name to the Society of Jesus.
We find that Inigo, the father of the order, was born in the Valley of Loyola in northern Spain. Here he was born to a wealthy family. There today is a tremendous monastery to the Jesuits and a magnificent chapel illustrating how much they honored this man and the wealth of that order. The castle next to it is where Ignatius was born. Ignatius, as a young man, was a violent, brutish sort. The police records of the day said violent, vindictive, and dangerous. He was a proud young man and involved himself in many of the sins and evils of the day. He wanted to be a great commander, but unfortunately in a battle with the French in Pamplona, he shattered his leg. And now his plans for the future as a great warrior were ended. There, while he was recuperating, he read books about the saints and about Jesus. These were fanciful books about the saints, about the miracles and the things they could do. He envisioned Christ as a great commander, and now he, as a saint, would capture the world for Jesus Christ. He had had a nervous breakdown, and this concept illustrated the condition that his mind was in. Now, as a cripple, he made his way all the way across Spain to the mountains of Montserrat. There was an ancient sanctuary there, and in that sanctuary was housed a very sacred image to the Catholic Church. This image was called the Black Virgin of Montserrat. In this church, Ignatius spent 3 days making confession and spent an entire night standing before this virgin statue as a knight in a vigil. He committed himself to the baby Jesus and to Mary. And from there he determined to go to Jerusalem. And there in Jerusalem he determined that he would conquer the Muslim world for Jesus Christ. All the powers of Rome couldn't do it, and now he would do it. On his way, he found he couldn't go because Barcelona had the plague. And so he had to stay in this little town called Manresa for 10 months. There in that town, as we arrived there, we found a monstrous institution of the Jesuits built over the place where Ignatius stayed there. It was a cave. 10 months in the cave, he tortured his body and his mind until, in exhaustion, he began to have dreams and visions. He claimed that the secret doctrine of the Catholic Church was taught to him in this place. In his eye, he saw lights flashing. And he believed that Mary came in the form of a light in Jesus. And he believed that he saw Satan in a spiral of light eyes before him. He believed that he had chased Satan around like a dog with a stick, and many other fanciful concepts, but he claimed that these teachings he received there were the foundation of his entire movement. And it's here he began the spiritual exercises of Ignatius. These were experiences that a master Jesuit would bring novices through, would bring other people through, to give them the same kind of mind that Ignatius developed through his experience. They were brought through these experiences just like music on a sheet. For 30 days they were told what to think, how to feel, when to groan and when to sigh, what to imagine, and they were to cut off all normal human emotion throughout those experiences. In the town of Alcalá, north of Madrid, here at the Colegio Mayor, he began his studies in theology. While he was there, he gathered a little group of men and women around him and began to bring them through his mental exercises. They would faint and fall aside. They would scream and pass out. Friends, this is demonic activity that this man was involved in, even in his early history. Ignatius was known for the rest of his life for his mystic powers. In Occult Theocracy by Lady Queensborough and Secret Societies of All Ages by Hecathorn, we learned that at the time there was an organization called the Alumbrado, or the Illuminati, in Spain. The Inquisition determined that Ignatius had been a member of this occult intellectual society and threw him in the jail there at the Inquisition. Upon his release, he made his way to Salamanca, to the great university there, but again he was brought under suspicion of being an Illuminist, and he was thrown in the Inquisition again. Now, upon being released, he made his way to the great University of Paris in France, and there he gathered intelligent young men around him, brought them under the control of the power of his mind, and these became the basis of his society. Not too far from the university, they dedicated themselves to the new order of the Jesuits there in Montmartre. Today there's a tremendous chapel on Montmartre, one of the most magnificent chapels that we saw while we were in Europe. And it's dedicated to the destruction of democracy and liberty in the world. Ignatius from there made his way to Rome, and in time he was accepted by the Pope. From that time, Rome was the center of this new satanic system, the Jesuit order. This is the Chiesa del Gesù in Rome, and entering into it we get some idea of the wealth and the power of the Society of Jesus. There a death mask of Loyola was made into a picture. We get a view of what he looked like. But the altars and the artwork are the ancient Baroque style, and it's a magnificent structure showing that the wealth of the nations at one time flowed into this order. When Xavier was once requested by one of the patients to scrape out an abscess, this is Xavier, one of Ignatius's followers, he felt rather squeamish about it. He put his hand, which was covered with a purulent matter, to his mouth in order to put his self-control to the extreme test. It's amazing that even at that early time, these men had minds that controlled their emotions. Rodriguez would not at first make use of this resting place, but afterwards, in order to punish himself for his weakness, he laid himself down naked in a bed in which immediately before a man had died of pediculosis, and which still swarmed with vermin. These men, with their mind over the control of their emotions, were sent out into the world. At first, they proved themselves in the hospitals, and that's where these quotations came from in Philip Miller's book, History of the Jesuits. But they also made their way out into the world of the pagans to win them to the new pagan Christianity.
The Jesuits expanded quickly around Europe. One of the primary ways in which they went about reclaiming some of the ground that had been lost to the Protestant reformers was to establish schools of education in various locations. They went for control of the information flows, imagining, quite rightly, that by controlling education, they could control knowledge and therefore control the worldviews and mindsets of coming generations. These schools that catered for children of all ages soon spread across the world as part of a covert campaign to turn people back to Rome. The key to it was that, unlike other Catholic institutions, the Jesuit schools actively encouraged Protestant children to enroll. This tactic gave them an opportunity to indoctrinate future generations with the rites, ceremonies and symbols of Rome. They particularly wanted to target the children of rich and influential Protestant families because they knew that what was taught to them would have a trickle-down effect on the rest of society. Like Jezebel herself, the Jezebel spirit goes for the powerful men who will influence others. The Jesuits also plotted to kill Queen Elizabeth I on many occasions so that the country could be returned to Rome. The Spanish Armada of 1588 was one such attempt to sail against Britain and overthrow the Queen, who was seen as heretical and illegitimate by Rome. The Spanish Armada was defeated, but true to the Jesuit oath, that which could not be achieved in the open was pursued in secret. After Elizabeth I died and James I took to the throne, Jesuits attempted to blow up the Houses of Parliament in 1605. In truth, the Jesuits were largely frustrated in Britain, but they did have more success in Europe. Having established themselves in Italy, Spain, Portugal and Austria, they set their sights on Germany, the birthplace of the Reformation. There they gained influence with the rulers and initiated campaigns of persecution against Christians. Jesuits were implicated in the assassination of the French King Henry III in 1589 and his successor, Henry IV, in 1610. They believed it was their right to kill any heretical monarch. The French king, Louis XIV, was more to the Jesuits' liking though. Louis had a Jesuit confessor from childhood whose influence turned him into a fanatical bigot, unleashing terrible persecution against Protestants. Louis also led an immoral life, and the Jesuit confessor made careful use of his secrets to have him trembling at his feet for forgiveness. This was a common tactic by Catholic priests generally, to use the confessional booth to gain access to secrets that could be used for blackmail later. Knowledge is power. By 1685, the situation was severe enough for hundreds of thousands of French citizens to flee for their lives to remote areas, and those that stayed behind faced terrible punishment. This was in fact replicated all across Europe, where true Christians had to flee to communities in remote areas to avoid persecution from Rome. Some of these examples are recorded in Fox's Book of Martyrs. As the Jesuits continued to rise to power and influence in Europe, they also accumulated vast amounts of wealth and property. However, their scandalous greed, their loose morals, their ceaseless political meddling, and their encroaching upon the clergy had stirred up enmity and hatred everywhere they had been, and this would lead to their downfall. Amongst the higher classes in particular, the Jesuits had been brought into complete disrepute. Governments began to realize that this single group were the source of nearly all the disruption in their lands. In fact, so severe was their cancerous activity that the Jesuits had become a threat to the very fabric of society. Nations could stand it no longer, and the Jesuits were systematically driven out from previously friendly Romanist countries during the period of 1760 to 1770. Although the Pope at that time, Clement XIII, still supported the Jesuits, the nations of Europe ramped up the pressure on him to take drastic action. The pressure on the Pope became too much to ignore, and so eventually he reluctantly called a secret conclave in 1769 to bring into effect the suppression of the Jesuits. Mysteriously, he died the evening before the meeting could be held. It was strongly suspected, of course, that the Jesuits had been the perpetrators of the murder. The next Pope, Clement XIV, tried to reform the Jesuits to no avail, and after further pressure from the monarchs of Europe, he finally abolished them in 1773. A year later, he was dead by poisoning, with the Jesuits again at the top of the suspected list.
Adam Weishaupt, a Jesuit-trained professor of canon law, well versed in the occult, formed a new secret organization that would unite all the secret societies for an unthinkable purpose: to gain complete control over the world and its resources, and to achieve total domination of its people. Weishaupt euphemistically described it as a new world order. His diabolical brotherhood was founded on a synthesis of the themes of secret societies that had gone before. He skillfully combined Masonic secret rituals and knowledge, the assassins' Islamic mysticism, killing arts, and use of hashish, the Priory of Zion's influential membership, and the Templars' wealth, power, military science, and vendetta against the Catholic Church. To that, he added his own knowledge of the occult. It was not an accident that he chose May the 1st, a very important date on the satanic calendar, for the founding of his society. The group was called the Illuminati. The public translation was intellectually inspired. But Weishaupt himself said in private that the word was derived from Lucifer and meant holders of the light. The official seal of the Brotherhood was a mystical, unfinished pyramid, and an eye above it with rays of light emanating in all directions. The eye represented the all-seeing, all-knowing nature of the illuminated Brotherhood reigning above the world. To his followers, the founder listed the 5 top-secret primary means that would be used to accomplish his dark goal of total world domination. 1. Monetary and sex bribery would be used to gain control of men already in high places in the various levels of all governments and other fields of endeavor. 2. The Illuminati who were on the faculty of colleges and universities were to cultivate the best students for the cause. 3. Influential people and specially trained students under the control of the Brotherhood would be placed behind the scenes of all government, religious and financial institutions and used as agents. 4. The secret society would develop absolute domination of the media so that all news and information could be slanted to convince the masses that a one world government is the only solution to our many problems. 5. the final phase of the operation would employ all resources in place to initiate military coups that would overthrow all opposing governments and put the world under one global government controlled by the Illuminati. The group was originally composed of 32nd-degree Masons and used various Masonic lodges as recruiting grounds and fronts. The highest-ranking Mason to be recruited was a nobleman from North Germany, Baron Knigge. In a startling revelation within the classified documents we obtained, we find proof that the Illuminati infiltrated the Soviet Union and the KGB. These communiques between two high-level KGB agents actually refer to the original illuminated one, Adam Weishaupt, by name. They go on to allude to a connection with two past rulers of Russia, Joseph Stalin and Nikita Khrushchev. Our mission to place agents within the walls of the Vatican is a goal that the founder Weishaupt talked about 200 years ago. It is something that has been attempted through the years by both Stalin and Khrushchev with no success, but I believe we can finally do it this time. What's more, in the lab our investigators made an alarming discovery. A magnified view reveals that an unnoticeable dot, the period at the end of the final sentence on the page, is actually a seal. It is the unfinished pyramid with an iron triangle above it. The official insignia of the Illuminati, a marking used by the secret society since its creation in 1776.
Take a dollar bill, turn it over, look at the Great Seal of the United States on the back. Now, draw a Star of David. 1 point will match up with the all-seeing eye, a common Masonic symbol. Now, look at the letters at the other points of the star. M-A-S-O-N. Coincidence?
Observe the back of the dollar bill. You will notice the Great Seal of the United States. This seal has ancient roots and contains mysterious symbology. The reverse of the Great Seal portrays an unfinished pyramid underneath an all-seeing eye, and is rumored to actually be the symbol of a secret society known as the Illuminati. As you will notice, on the base of the pyramid, in Roman numerals, is the number 1776. This is the same year that the Declaration of Independence was signed. Coincidentally, the Illuminati, meaning holders of the light, was created on May 1st, 1776 by an Adam Weishaupt. Weishaupt claimed to have the true explanation of the mysteries and symbology of another ancient secret organization, the Freemasons. Weishaupt wrote about fire worship and hermetic magic, and he recruited from within the Masonic lodges to form a secret society within a society by promising secret knowledge above and beyond Masonry. It was this secret knowledge that would lead to what Weishaupt called the New World Order. The eye in the pyramid began to appear in Masonic symbology in the late 1700s, and in 1785 was already appearing in the United States.
Over time, the organization of Freemasonry evolved with an increasing emphasis on these spiritual metaphors and less focused on the actual construction of buildings. By the late 1600s, just as the Enlightenment was getting going, Masonic lodges started enrolling growing numbers of accepted gentlemen who had no direct links to the building trade at all. Some writers suggest that this happened simply because of a growing interest in architecture amongst the nobility. The truth is that there was a growing conviction amongst the populace that these Masonic lodges, with all their secrets and symbolism, were starting to harbour truths handed down from ancient civilisations, and by joining them they may be able to get ahead in the world. By the early 1700s, all the original emphases on the principles of stonemasonry had been turned into allegories with occult spiritual meaning. As illustrated here, tools of the trade such as the square and compass were used to describe spiritual and philosophical ideas. When people turned away from God and the Enlightenment, the spiritual vacuum was filled by Freemasonry. Politicians, scientists, even clergymen, the most influential and powerful enlightened movers and shakers of the day, were the new initiates. Karl Marx, George Washington, and Marquis de Lafayette. If you missed it, here they are again side by side. Look at what they're all doing with their right hand. Now why are they all hiding their hand like that? What does this hidden hand gesture mean? Does it mean anything at all? Perhaps it's just coincidence. Well, let's take a look at some more portraits of famous personalities from history. It happens far too often to be coincidence. This hiding of the hand gesture is actually from the 13th degree of Freemasonry, which is also known as the Royal Arch degree. It is symbolized with the triple Tau. Now this gesture is the sign of the master of the second veil. I won't go into the details of it, but basically what this gesture is doing is signaling to other initiates that they're part of the secret brotherhood and that their actions are inspired by Masonic beliefs. What they're saying is, it doesn't matter what I appear to be on the surface, this secret gesture tells you that we are working towards the same utopian end, you and I. We are both enlightened with the illuminating knowledge of Masonry. With this in mind, we should be careful not to pledge too much allegiance or get too fervent about either side in politics. There was a situation in the 2004 presidential elections where Americans had to choose between John Kerry and George Bush. What most didn't know is that although one was Republican and one was a Democrat on the surface, both were members of the Skull and Bones Masonic Society at Yale University. Both being Freemasons, did the American public really have a choice at the polling office, or were they voting for the same ideals dressed in different colours? There's a reason why, no matter who we elect, things always deteriorate in politics.
You were both in Skull and Bones, the secret society.
It's so secret we can't talk about it.
What does that mean for America?
You both were members of Skull and Bones, a secret society at Yale. What does that tell us?
Not much, because it's a secret.
Is there a secret handshake? Is there a secret code?
I wish there were something secret I could manifest.
322, a secret number?
There are all kinds of secrets, Tim, but one thing is not a secret. I disagree with this president's direction that he's taking the country.
Prime Minister Tony Blair is a high-ranking Freemason. There are approximately 600,000 Freemasons in Britain today. Many Freemasons occupy highly paid jobs at local borough councils across Britain, which often have Masonic temples inside council buildings, maintained at the taxpayer's expense.
They are all around us, invisible and unsuspected. 3 million members of a secretive society older than the American Republic. For nearly 300 years, generations of Freemasons have obeyed their oaths, hidden their rituals, and maintained their silence until now. Who are these men?
See, that's what they don't want to talk about.
There's nothing wrong with secrets.
JFK, we know what happened at Area 51. Don't ask. American presidents, to the British royal family, to the Emperor Napoleon, Masons have risen to positions of tremendous wealth, fame, and authority around the world. Is this coincidence, or part of a conspiracy that stretches from our time back to myth and legend, to kings and crusaders, bloodthirsty pirates, and hidden treasure? And in fact, we travel the secret pathways of Masonic signs and symbols every day without even knowing it. The fabric of Freemasonry is deeply woven into our history, our daily lives, and it is said, some of our most horrifying crimes. Every one of our major cities contains a monument to Masonic secrecy. Ornate temples closed to outsiders and open to suspicion. Fantastic structures funded and furnished by members' dues and donations.
Masonry is sort of like the Hotel California. You can check out any time you like, but you can never leave.
They have hundreds of members, several branches called lodges, and a written constitution filled with fantastic symbols, signs, tools, hand clasps, and even their own alphabet. They devise a hierarchy of novice masons, master masons, and grand masters. 33 levels called degrees. Each one reached through a secret initiation and rewarded with a secret password that members swear never to utter outside the lodge under penalty of death. New members must be approved by secret ballot. A white ball for a yes vote. A single dark stone means exclusion. It's the origin of the term blackball. The three most important Masonic symbols have endured unchanged since the 1700s. The most familiar is the letter G. But what does it stand for? God? Geometry? Geography? Or Grand Architect, the true designer of the universe? There is no single official definition.
To suggest it began in Scotland as early as the 16th century, while others say it was founded in England in the early 18th century. To this day, there are over 1 million members, from the likes of Jesse Jackson and Bob Dole, from John Wayne to Winston Churchill. Brad Meltzer, author of the Book of Fate, reveals more about these members.
From Voltaire to George Washington to Winston Churchill, the Freemasons have spent centuries collecting the most powerful members of society. In the United States, they grew that power to new heights. They had everyone from Benjamin Franklin to Benedict Arnold, John Wayne to Mark Twain, Bob Dole to Jesse Jackson, even Harry Houdini. 8 signers of the Declaration of Independence were Freemasons. 9 signers of the U.S. Constitution. They had 5 Chief Justices of the Supreme Court.
From here on out, you may sit back and wonder, how can you recognize a Freemason? They can be recognized most commonly by the society symbol. They can be seen everywhere from rings to car license plates. But how does one become a member of such a secret group? You must follow one of their sayings. To be one, ask one.
It used to be that fathers and grandfathers would invite their sons and their grandsons to join the Freemasons, and now it's very different. I'm going to give you a phrase, and now that I've told you this phrase, I want you to look for it on cars. You'll see it on bumper stickers everywhere. To be one, ask one. That is how you become a Freemason today. To be one, you have to ask one. So that is also how the Freemasons have shrunk over time. It used to be that people would wait around for their fathers and grandfathers to ask them. Nowadays, what you'll see is we had a whole generation of people who were waiting and waiting for their fathers and grandfathers to ask them to come in, and they didn't realize that the rules had changed. To be one, you had to ask one.
Across this country and across the world, men of all backgrounds and jobs are members. Your neighbor, brother, father, or son could all be a part of it. But perhaps in the United States, the place that has the deepest and greatest history of the Freemasons is Washington, D.C. After all, our first president, George Washington, was a Freemason, and after him, a dozen more Freemasons will become presidents as well. But George Washington's membership to this day has had a lasting impact on the mystery of the Freemasons. And this, perhaps, is the source for the greatest myth of all.
When the city of Washington, D.C. was first built, the Freemasons actually put their brand into the city streets. They started with the pentagram, one of the most famous religious symbols in history. It dates back to the Mayans, to the Egyptians, and to the Chinese. And it started 200 years ago when George Washington, a known Freemason and one of the 3 people who was responsible for designing the city grid of Washington, actually put this 5-pointed star into the city streets. Now look at these points. It starts with Logan Circle and DuPont Circle. When you follow the map, it forms the star. The crazy part is the top point of the pentagram is the White House. If you go a little bit to the east, you'll see the square and compass, the most famous symbol in Freemasonry, is actually also built into the city grid. And the top point of this symbol is the U.S. Capitol building. 200 years ago, the Freemasons marked the city of Washington, D.C. To this day, nobody knows why. The only way you can see the pentagram, the only way you see the square and compass built into the city grid, is if you're looking from an aerial view. And that means the Freemasons anticipated air travel by 100 years. Another interesting fact is the cornerstone of the White House itself was laid in a Freemason ceremony, but it didn't stop there. It was also the U.S. Capitol building. The Freemasons also did it with the Washington Monument, with the Library of Congress, with the National Cathedral, with the Smithsonian. All of these marked in Freemason ceremonies.
So you've seen the way it maps out. And considering that George Washington was one of only 3 men to rid out Washington, D.C., it almost seems possible, doesn't it? Or is it just all beyond belief?
Let me take you through this, branch by branch.
The 101st Airborne Division, air assault.
Vice President Dick Cheney, the man who's only a heartbeat away from the presidency, is actually a blood relation. He's President Bush's 9th cousin once removed. Cheney's cousin Barack Obama is also Bush's 11th cousin and the 9th cousin of Brad Pitt. But we're only just getting started. President Lincoln was President Bush's 7th cousin 5 times removed, and Bush shared more than just a ballot with John Kerry. That's right, they're 9th cousins twice removed.
Really? What do you think of that?
Yeah, they have the same chin.
There's also royalty in the Bush bloodline. Princess Diana was Bush's 11th cousin twice removed. And then there's this bombshell.
Happy birthday, Mr. President.
Sure, she may have been singing to JFK, but what about GWB? He is, after all, her 9th cousin 3 times removed.
Oh, maybe it's the eyebrows. I think
the eyebrows. They have the same eyebrows? He's also related to Playboy founder Hugh Hefner, even Pocahontas, and Vlad the Impaler. Trace the family tree far enough, and you get Madonna, Celine Dion, and Tom Hanks.
My mom always said life was like a box of chocolate.
Christine, you've heard the adage politics makes strange bedfellows. Apparently politics also makes for strange relations. Christine, you've heard the adage politics makes strange bedfellows. Apparently politics also makes for strange relations. Thanks to the New England Historic Genealogical Society, we now know the presidential candidates are related to a host of famous and historic figures.
In this primary campaign.
I opposed this war in 2002.
But do you know their relatives? Obama is distantly related to 6 presidents: George W. and George H.W. Bush, Gerald Ford, Lyndon Johnson, Harry S. Truman, and James Madison. Obama's family tree also includes Sir Winston Churchill and Civil War General Robert E. Lee.
Thank you all. Thank you.
She's also related to beatnik author Jack Kerouac and the wife of Prince Charles of England. John McCain's ancestry was more difficult to trace, but it's known he's the 6th cousin of First Lady Laura Bush.
Incest was practiced by ancient Egyptian royalty. Mothers married sons and brothers married sisters to keep the power and the money all in the family. Like their Pharaonic ancestors, the British monarchy have a long history of incestuous inbreeding.
Gave me a look that only a mother could give a child.
those secretly driving the agenda have been known by many names. Leaked reports confirm that they meet throughout the world behind closed doors to discuss their agenda. Then, like clockwork, their plans begin to show up in the media, finance, corporate, government, and military arenas. Of course, not everyone involved in these groups is in on the decision-making. There is a hierarchy of knowledge and participation. One of the primary symbols of the controlling elite is the all-seeing eye. It's on the dollar bill. It's on the American mass surveillance system initially called Total Information Awareness. It's on the British intelligence agency MI5. And it even oversees the Supreme Court complex in Israel, designed and funded entirely by the Rothschilds. I believe they've taken the majestic image of the Cheops pyramid and its legendary metallic capstone and perverted the meaning to represent those at the top being able to track and control all those under them. One of the painful ways this information has been used is by people who want to promote anti-Semitism. They wrongly call this a Jewish agenda and continue the ongoing racism that undermines and destroys so many lives. Let me be clear, this is definitely not a Jewish agenda. It's been documented that central bankers even funded both sides of World War II, as well as some of the corporations associated with Hitler's atrocities against the Jews. Since these people have more money than their families would need for generations, and since they have the power to create money, I don't believe wealth is their end goal.
After you have all the material things that you could possibly want in life, what is left to excite you? And for many people, the answer is power, global power. They became intellectually elite. They began to think that they had a plan that was better than anybody else's plan. They got the idea that freedom is dangerous. If you give people freedom, you know what? They're probably not going to use it wisely like we think they should. We are smarter than they are. And for their own good, we should rule them.
As I came to accept the idea of a ruling elite planning for total global domination, I began to hear these same people actually talking more boldly and publicly about it, only they call it the New World Order.
When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this New World Order.
It is a new world order with significantly different and radically new challenges.
A new world order can be created. It's a great opportunity.
Given the condition of our world, a new world order can sound like a great idea. But I had to distinguish between what I was discovering about global domination, a one-world government run by an elite few, and the reality of our global interconnectedness, which is the realization that at a fundamental and even spiritual level, we are not separate, we are all connected. But the agenda for global domination is really the exact opposite. It's a divide and conquer strategy to keep us all pitted against each other, thinking that it's the Democrats or Republicans, the liberals or conservatives who are the problem, when both parties are ultimately serving the same plan. I believe we're heading toward a totalitarian world authority, actually a military dictatorship, run by a tiny elite who have all the power and make all the rules. If they succeed, there'll be nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Think about it.
Why do some artists who have a certain amount of talent, some not very much, why do they get picked up by the corporations to become these big influencers of young people and other people through the entertainment and the music industry, and others with incredible talent never get off the ground? It's because they are chosen.
they think that all entertainment is therefore nothing more than entertainment. It never ever was that case.
What we see here is that this is actually all based up into psychological warfare done by military intelligence, wrapped up with occultism.
Disney World looks like a whole fun bunch of rides, but what we actually have here are a number of rides that are sponsored by military industrial corporations.
Happiest place on earth, my snow white ass.
Walt Disney was hired by J. Edgar Hoover to instill mind pattern programming into the children. It was an FBI plan. It was instigated.
To really appreciate how this could be done, you need to appreciate something called trauma-based mind control. During the last war in the concentration camps of Germany, they started to perfect the manipulation of a natural mechanism in the mind that shuts out trauma. If you could systematically traumatize someone and start with children, particularly before the age of 5 and 6, you could turn their minds into a honeycomb of self-contained compartments, none of which was aware of the other's existence.
They start with wanting to make you an obedient slave at first, and so they do a lot of sensory deprivation, they do a lot of sensory overload, and they switch between the two, and they do out-and-out torture. They take a small child and they electroshock. In my case, it was electroshock to the brain. I've had drugs injected into my body so that my nerves were just like on fire, and then they would just touch me. They kept me awake for many hours at night, would not let me sleep. They do use cattle prods on people in torturing them, and they do use electrical stimulation to the genitals and also on the teeth. I was made to eat my own feces as a little child. I was made to drink my own urine. I was not allowed to go to the bathroom. I was placed in a sensory deprivation tank. I had my shoulders, my knees, my toes, and my fingers, my elbows dislocated and then put back into place. I have had my eyelids taped open. I saw games of Russian roulette played where it was chosen beforehand that a child would die, and the child would put the gun up to his head and pull the trigger, and this child would end up dying. But it was meant to scare all of us, to keep us in terror.
Disney is used as a torture device to compartmentalize and bring about this dissociative identity disorder.
We've got these lists of Mouseketeers. We've got Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, Justin Timberlake.
These were all poor little children that were brainwashed together in a Disney program.
What they will do is use these people in high-profile rituals.
Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life. But there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad.
Let's be clear, I don't believe that they're really pulling energy and power into their phallus and energizing themselves to be God-men. They believe it.
Actually, right now we should talk a little about Tom Cruise and Scientology.
Scientology, according to L. Ron Hubbard Jr., is a black ritual done over a long period of time. Instead of getting all your trauma at once, you get it in little increments.
This footage is worth money.
What footage?
This thing you're looking into?
It's a camera.
Exactly.
Britney Spears created quite a commotion here at this tattoo parlor in Sherman Oaks tonight when she showed up, well, let's just say with a whole new look that may not be so popular with her fans.
They aren't just pop stars trying to cry out for attention. These are people that have been put through abuse throughout their lives and raised in this environment that we can't even imagine.
There is breaking news now on Fox News Channel. The Los Angeles Times and the Associated Press are now reporting Michael Jackson has died in Los Angeles this afternoon.
And of course, you know that the Jacksons were also ritually abused.
Really, it's a tragedy at the end of the day. That is the type of creature that his father produced.
You just said that you would practice the dance steps and your father would be holding a belt in his hand. Is that what you just said?
Yes. And he would tear you up if you missed.
I know what evil looks like, folks, and I'm telling you, that's an evil man. And the whole thing is an evil spectacle.
So I finally got my own TV show coming out next fall on CBS. It's a half-hour weekly show that I will host entitled Let's Hunt and Kill Billy Ray Cyrus. It's a fairly self-explanatory plot. Each week we let the hounds of hell loose and we chase that jarhead, no-talent, cracker asshole all over the globe. Until I finally catch that fruity little ponytail of his in the back, pull him to his knees, put a shotgun in his mouth like a big black cock of death.
That's how we sell sex to little girls. That's how we sell sex to little girls.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. I come to you today representing families.
The White House claims he's too busy to even acknowledge Sheen's letter, never mind meet with Sheen. But obviously he's not too busy to talk about some mindless antics of this hip-hop star jumping on stage at an MTV Music Awards show.
He's a jackass.
In fact, Obama routinely makes mindless comments about everything under the sun. Yet he can't even acknowledge questions that are shared by the 9/11 victims' family members that are put out in this letter by Charlie Sheen.
And I'm sick of this. I'm sick of this bloody morality. There was moral outrage in America. It's disgusting, Janet Jackson. Immoral. I wonder which of these pictures is more sodding immoral.
Welcome to the X Factor. Your final starts right here.
They've been programmed. And I'm sad because I know that it's hard for people like that to take a serious interest in world affairs. I see how easy it is for the masses to be manipulated.
It's a psychic weapon to blind people from all the majesty and beauty that is creation, and to blind people from their families and their children and just the amazing life force that's all around us.
The scale and fine detail in which these opinion formers right across society, from entertainment, media through to politics, etc., are actually brought through from childhood to do those things is absolutely incredible. And when the lid really comes off this, and it's coming off, then people are going to look at the world they've been living in and see just, even if people now think, yes, it's a controlled world, whoa, wait till you see the level of control.
We're standing up to the drama that they do bring. Just check the left hand, see the G-ring. That mock rituals, what are they unleashing? Masonic rituals live on TV. It's all been exposed, like the Versace flow. Just like MK Ultra is on my control. You tripping when you ain't sipping. Have a refill, you feeling like you in prison, huh? That's 'cause that's real.
The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. You can see it when you turn on your television. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to